Welcome to A Way Forward, the podcast where I sit down and have real discussions about the challenges we face in our cities, communities, and neighborhoods. The goal of this podcast is to create a space that includes expert interviews, guests with lived experiences, and voices not often heard. I'm your host, retired Police Chief Daniel Hahn, and I will bring my experience in law enforcement, community, and education to each conversation so that together we can build a way forward. Okay, so my guest today is the leader of the Sacramento Metro Chamber. And I think most people probably don't fully understand the breadth of the Metro Chamber, but so I'll give just a couple things. It's truly the Metro Chamber. It has like 6 counties, over 1,000 members, a large board, and does a bunch of stuff that we'll get into in a second. And you have to pull all that together. So welcome to A Way Forward. I want to start with, it's always interesting for people to understand a little bit about your background. And so when I think of the chambers, any chamber, but especially the Metro Chamber, I think, well, until probably I was police chief or captain, I probably didn't understand much of anything about the Metro Chamber. And I surely, growing up, thinking about what do I want to do when I grow up as a profession, running a chamber, I wouldn't even have known to think about that. And so talk a little bit about your upbringing and what led you, because you've been involved in chambers for quite a couple decades. Yep. And I don't think it was what you thought as a kid either. So talk a little bit about your upbringing and what led you to get involved in this sort of work.
Absolutely. Well, first and foremost, I'm honored to be here, so thank you for the invitation. Okay, so where do we begin? There was a couple questions in one there, right? Yeah. For the chamber, you mentioned it, we are serving 6 counties and 22 cities here in the region, and that's no easy feat, and that's a lot of burden to bear because it's a lot of collaboration and cross-pollination of ideas, and it's a melding pot of kind of movement and moving that organization forward. But we'll start where I began. So I grew up back on the East Coast, just north of downtown Baltimore. Loved my time there. From there, I ended up in the Air Force. So surprisingly, we may have some more things in common than we realized because in the Air Force, I was a security police officer, and I worked for OSI, which is the Office of Special Investigations. So not quite the FBI, but I would say the Air Force version, maybe equivalent. Loved my time in the Air Force, and am truly grateful to have served our nation and also the knowledge and wisdom that I was able to take away from that.
So surely in the Air Force, they had a CEO Chamber of Commerce course that you took, right?
No. Criminal justice was, that was the path. Right. And I didn't know Chamber of Commerce. Ultimately, I ended up in Las Vegas. I had some grandparents there and a grandfather who passed away, and my grandmother had never driven in her life. It was either go to Korea for a 2-year remote or exit, and a lot of my friends were kind of pondering just like me, what you were going to do next, and so I decided to move on. Anyhow, ended up in Las Vegas. Loved it. I actually started in Station Casinos, and I worked for the head of security. And at the time, that's a locals property, and great experience. Our job was to implement people or work to get the security personnel trained as EMTs. So that way we could respond better to the guest experience. One day I was in the back of the house with the marketing folks, and they were like, "What are you doing working in security? You have a personality. You have no business over there." And I flippantly turned and said, "Make me an offer," and went away. A couple days later, I get called in, and they said, "Hey, we'd like to talk to you. We'd like to move you into marketing." And so I ended up in casino and event marketing. And if you're going to be in Vegas, you want to be on the Strip. That's where the nightlife is. That's where all the action is. So I ended up at Mirage Resorts and worked in casino and event marketing there between the couple different properties. Ultimately went over to help open the Venetian, same role. Loved my time in the casino, completely different, but there's a lot of parallels to what that industry taught me to what we do today in terms of chamber. Long story short, if you're in Vegas, you work 24/7. You work all day. It comes to life at night, weekends. You have no life. Your life is that. So I decided I wanted something different. And through relationships I had established, they said, "Hey, Robert, you should talk to your friends over at the chamber." And I went into
Which you probably knew a little bit from your marketing work, right?
Didn't really know them, believe it or not. Okay. They were around, but not really as engaged as one would think. So I went over and I interviewed for a job, and the HR person was true, like old school HR. She was from GE. She very sterile, very, and she said to me, she's like, I don't know why we would even hire you. This pay isn't what you made in the casino. And I don't know. And I'm like, look, I'm looking for a different way of life. I want Monday through Friday, weekend and holiday off. And she laughed. She sort of laughed at me. And I did not know at the time why there was this, but I was eager and I'm like, look, I'm going to have weekends and holidays off. This is the life.
Right.
And anyhow, I got the job and at the Vegas Chamber. And at the time, the Vegas Chamber is one of the largest chambers in the nation, while Vegas was not back in that time. We had over 7,000 members. And there is no state chamber, but it essentially is like the state chamber. Long story short, was there, loved it. What I quickly learned in the world of chamber is 24/7 has a different meaning, because when you get known in your business community and in your community in general, you're spotted when you're in Costco running your errands, or you're at dinner, or that sort of thing. So it was a different type of 24/7, but it resonated with me in the fact that it just felt natural to what I was doing every single day. Anyhow, from there, ended up at the Austin Chamber for a few years. Loved that. So that was the capital of Texas. Interesting times, but definitely loved my experience there. From that point, I headed east to just north of Boston to a town called Cape Ann, and I ran the chamber there for a couple years, which had 4 different communities, so different time period. Ultimately ended up in the Phoenix metro area and ran the Glendale Chamber for the past 10 years, and now I've been here in Sacramento for just over a year and a half.
Which brings me to the next question of, why'd you come to Sacramento? Like, what drew you to this chamber, this region?
Here's what I'll tell you. I think Sacramento, the region here, is absolutely phenomenal. There is a lot of buzz. Much like probably most of the world, in 2020, I was about to, head into a milestone birthday. And I thought, okay, what does this mean for me? Where am I is this where I want to stay? I had a great employment contract in Arizona that went through 2030. Loved my board, loved the organization that we built, but I knew that's not where I wanted to be. But I didn't know exactly, but I had a few ideas of regions or areas. And so next year will be 25 years for me serving Chambers of Commerce. And so I put out to our national association, and they track us. So those that are pretty good, they keep their tabs on us. And when opportunities present, they'll call us and say, listen. In any event, they sort of knew I was open to the idea. I wasn't unhappy, but absolutely open. And
which is like the best time to be searching, right?
It is. It really is.
Yeah.
And so they called and they said, we think we found the perfect opportunity. And we think that you will resonate with them and they will resonate with you. And I said, okay, because they had just called me a couple of months before and they wanted me to go back to Texas into the Fort Worth area. And I'm like, love the idea? No. No. I'm at a point in my life and career, I'm going to say thank you, but no thank you.
That's a good point.
But in any event, I've spent almost every year here for the last 20 years because a lot of our training through the Chamber of Commerce industry was always held right here in Sacramento. The Cal Chamber partnered with an organization called WACE, which is Western Association of Chamber Executives. And so every year we would embark on Sacramento for several days and come together with what I call chamber nerds from across the country, and we would sponge up our industry and learn from one another. And so I was here pre-COVID, I was here during COVID, and post-COVID. So I always sort of had this feeling for Sacramento, and then Tahoe's my respite. That's where I get away from. So I'd been going to Tahoe for a number of years, and so everything sort of felt right.
All right. So as you've been here you're almost 2 years now, right?
Year and a half.
Year and a half.
I'll take the 2 years. The year and a half feels like, a decade, but a year and a half.
So you came at some challenging times, and at the tail end of some challenging times, whether it's COVID that really, especially in our city, shut not only businesses down, but a big customer base of businesses, all the state workers who are still not fully back in office. That, I've lived my whole life here, and there are times prior to now that the state workers were really the only customers downtown. So if they are not at work, the businesses don't have any customers. Luckily, it's changed a little bit over time. But what do you think are the biggest issues right now facing the business community in this region, in the Sacramento region?
That's a loaded question, and here's why I say that, and I'll answer a couple different ways. But in serving chambers, and again, this region, think of that, 6 counties, 22 cities. So we go from North Tahoe down to Davis and everything in between. Within that territory, you're going to have an entrepreneur, you're going to have someone that's a home-based business, you're going to have small, mid-size, our large corporate partners, things like that. They're all on a different page of the playbook every single day. And so that's where it becomes exciting but challenging for my organization to make sure that we're leading and we're collaborating and working alongside of them. You know, one of the biggest issues, I think it's the biggest one today, is the uncertainty that happens. There's a lot of things happening in the federal government out of DC that really are causing businesses to maybe hold back in an investment of whether it's equipment or supplies, things like that. It could be hiring. It could be hampering a number of decisions that they're making. So certainly the uncertainty of the world today, tariffs, things like that, are at the forefront. A couple other big things here specifically to our region, because again, everything starts local at home. I think public safety and what's happened as a result of the pandemic has certainly burdened the business community. And, you know, we need to work in collaboration with our elected officials and our public safety to really champion our way out of this. I think Prop 36 was a great example of this state speaking up and speaking very loudly. So I think those two are probably one of the biggest. A couple others I would say here in our region, you know, when we look at the quality of life from a workforce, you know, can the average person afford a home? Or do we have different entry points and different levels for people to kind of plant their roots and grow their family and start off? And some people start off in a starter home or a smaller. So I think the affordability and the workforce housing element is interesting. You mentioned workforce, obviously state capital. I think we have a lot of opportunity there to really cultivate what that workforce looks like. Another big one I think that's really scary for a lot of people is AI. And the fact that we need to embrace this. I think that, you know, much like we use Microsoft Word and Excel, in probably a very short number of years, AI is going to feel very much like that to many of us. We're already using it, we just don't recognize it. But I think in the world of commerce and business, AI is going to be a game changer for us.
I agree. So we and we'll get into a little in a minute about Prop 36, Prop 47, and things like that. But I'm curious how you think we're doing in regards to the business community, business climate, as we came out of the throes of COVID, which I think sometimes we forget where we were at the beginning of COVID, when we know so much more now than we did at that point, where people were working from home. We had protests going on at the time. And I know you've worked in other cities that probably had a lot of these same challenges. But as police chief at the time, I would have phone calls saying, be more forceful with the protesters, get them off of our street. I'd have phone calls that said, there should be no police officer anywhere near the protesters. And in the middle of that are people that probably, some of which probably spent their life savings into their business, that their windows are being smashed, that there's been graffiti, and then you had the homeless issues on top of that where maybe feces in front of their doors. And there was a time where you walk downtown, there's businesses that themselves put boards across their window because they knew there was going to be a protest that night. And so you'd have all these different opinions of how this should be handled. And in the middle of that are the businesses that are, if you will, a victim, regardless of how you handle it, right? So how do you think the business community is doing coming out of that now? Like, you know, you still see some, you know, not as many businesses as you would before, but how do you, in relative terms, how do you think we're doing after going through a bunch of stuff all at the same time?
So what I would say is we learned a lot in COVID. I think there was a lot of things that challenged us, and I think we will come out stronger for that. I would say optimism. Right now, the momentum that I feel, and as I'm talking to business owners and you know, where they are, what they're trying to do, what their aspirations are, you know, they're goal oriented. They're set on the future and growth. Now, do they have some sting and some burn from some of the stuff? Absolutely. But I think it's to reassure them that we're in a renaissance as a region, as a chamber of commerce, as an industry. You know, it's our job to help set that pace going forward for business. To work alongside our partners, whether it's other organizations or, as I said, elected officials, to really figure out and navigate ourselves forward. But overall, I would say optimism. But I will also say that, like I mentioned earlier, when you cover that vast majority of number of businesses and industries, someone's going to have a bad day, a bad week, bad month. And so, part of my goal and our team's job is to meet them where they are, understand, show empathy to what's going on in that business, and then really figure out how we can help be a part of the solution. Mm-hmm. We don't have all the answers at the Chamber. I would love to say that I have a treasure trove of answers and solutions. I don't. Where those come from is conversation, collaboration, regionalism. But if we can help get people pointed in the right direction, or what I find sometimes is when I go out and I visit businesses, they're happy that you're there, they're excited. But when you sort of say like, well, what's keeping you up at night? What stresses you? What's the one or two things? Sometimes they'll just go into it and they'll share with you. And sometimes they'll hold back. And I would rather them share, because that truly gives me the pulse of where we're at. So when we speak on behalf of business, it's truly from the heart and the core of what business owners and entrepreneurs are saying. Right now we've got to really focus on our core and in the core of downtown. And I think we've got a lot of opportunity. So again, depending upon the business in the day, you could get a little bit different. But overall, I think the sentiment is optimism. They're cautious because, like I said earlier, I don't want to contradict myself, but the uncertainty that's happening nationally causes that. But here in Sacramento, there's a simmer, there's a buzz.
Good. That's being a lifelong Sacramento, that's good to hear.
I love it.
And we'll get into a little bit of the importance of business to people that aren't in business, But you mentioned earlier, and then you also mentioned kind of work together and just a minute ago, but you mentioned Prop 36 earlier. So several years back, Prop 47 was passed that, without getting into the nitty-gritty details, some of Prop 47, if you will, decriminalized certain things to a certain point, like made it lesser of a crime for drugs, for things like shoplifting, theft, and then you started seeing videos on social media of just like groups of people going into shopping centers or stores and just stealing everything and leaving. And pretty soon there's got to be a buzz, I think, for even people that supported Prop 47, that like something needs to be done. There doesn't seem to be enough consequences. And so Prop 36 came around and was on the ballot. And I cannot remember a time when something passed so overwhelmingly as Prop 36. I think it was something like 68%. I can't think of a single thing. I imagine there has been, but I can't think of one, any bill or something that has passed in our state by 68%. Usually 52% is a good win, right? This was 68%. So I think overwhelmingly, if nothing else, people thought something isn't working now, we need to try something new. So I'm curious your opinion on Prop 36-1. And then the second part of that is there's been some controversy about the funding for Prop 36, that no funding initially, then there was some funding that there's certain people that still don't think that that's enough ongoing funding to fully realize what 68% of the voters wanted. Absolutely. So your opinion on Prop 36 and then your thoughts on funding.
So you're right. I think you said it well, and that's your background, law enforcement. When nearly 70% of Californians speak up, I think that resonates. That should resonate with anyone, whether you're in business, you're retired, you're in government. It doesn't matter. I mean, the people have spoken. By and large, we've got to have law and order, right? Rules are there for a reason. We live in a modern day society. I think that there's sometimes, people and individuals sort of become complacent in the world we live in. We can be detached from a lot of things because of cell phones, and all those things that we love also sometimes can be a curse in a way. If we're going to live in a modern day society and we want to grow, this region is going to grow, whether we like it or not. The region is growing. There's going to be rules and there need to be consequences. I mean, when we were growing up, there were consequences, I'm sure, in your household, and I know there was in mine.
Definitely was.
And unfortunately, sometimes, and I think this is a systemic problem around, we also have to look at what I call, kind of what I say, the home training. Not everybody has that same sort of foundational start that others have. And so that's where, as a society, we have to fill those voids, whether it's fortunately or unfortunately, because I look at, in your world of law enforcement, and I share this just from my previous experience with our law enforcement, I felt like every time I went on a ride along, there were certainly crimes happening, but they were more focused on mental health, therapist, domestic violence that's started from maybe some alcohol or drug abuse and things like that. So the policing of crime, if you will, of, I don't know if you robbed the bank or stole something from the store. I mean, that sort of wasn't the forefront that I was seeing. It was really on this other side of what the law enforcement was having to do. So, for me, we have got to have a safe community. Business needs a safe and clean community, bottom line. Right. I think we could all agree that everyone deserves to have a place to call home, a safe place to sleep, a safe place to, raise their family. And so we need it, and unfortunately there were some incidents, as you and I were discussing earlier, where law enforcement may not have been at their best. Right. I get it, and I empathize with everyone that's in law enforcement, because I feel like there's today a level of provoking, and where it's kind of like that challenging the system. When I grew up, you didn't challenge if a law enforcement officer said, and I know it's a different time, but at the same time, there's that level of respect for certain things and certain people seems to sort of be gone in society in some regard. You hold the door for the person behind you. If you see someone elderly, you help them through, that sort of thing. But so all in all, we've got to have a safe, clean downtown communities that we live in.
And what are your thoughts on the funding issue? There seems like there's still people unhappy with the funding of Prop 36, even though now there is some funding for it now, but there's still people that think like that isn't what was kind of on the ballot. So in your opinion, do you think there needs to be more funding or something different, or the conversation needs to keep going, or what are your thoughts on something? Because again, I go back to, I haven't seen anything passed by 68% in a while.
I think it's a wake-up call for us, right? We're in very polarizing times, yes, and the divide politically is breaking us, right? And so, we're a bipartisan organization. Now, everyone may have their personal beliefs and what they like and don't like, but I'm trying to keep us in the same center. Right. So every time something's going on, that's my goal at the chamber, is we're going to be the same center. We're going to be the center of conversation. We're going to create a space that everyone can be heard. We can respect each other's differences, opinions, and views, and come out stronger and not necessarily wage war with one another. So I think it's a wake-up call for a lot of our legislators and elected officials to figure out how we're prioritizing the investment we make into public safety, mental health, substance abuse, things like that. And I think we can do better. It gets political. Listen, when I first got in the chamber, the one thing that I was on the membership side of the house, so I had membership and community relations. And what was interesting, and I was at the Vegas chamber, we were bifurcated a little bit as an organization, and we were a large enterprise. I mean, I remember 75, 80, knocking the door of maybe 100 employees. So for a chamber of commerce, it was a big deal. But we really didn't understand what was going on in public policy, and they were making decisions. Right. And then I'd have members call and people that I work with going, well, I don't understand what I'm supposed to say to these folks, or why do I care about it, or I think opposite of what we think. So I think that the politicking and the politics that go on, we have to sort of set some of that stuff aside. Sometimes you will find, and we love many of our elected officials, right? But sometimes they're looking for that next position instead of working,
especially in a region like Sacramento.
In the position they are. We're a government town. Yeah. We're the fourth largest economy in the world. Yeah. So we have to understand those dynamics, that they have aspirations too. So we got to work within them, whatever position they're in. But I do think that we need to seriously really understand the funding that's there, the organizations that are providing the services, how to get them the support that they need. And if that takes a greater investment, have those tough conversations. Because if we want to drive business and you want us to grow jobs and grow the economy and bring new businesses to the region and get people to expand, they're not going to do it if downtown is crumbling and falling apart, and their workforce, it feels unsafe. If their patrons of their restaurant or establishment don't want to come downtown. Our suburban areas around have strengthened greatly. That's amazing for us, for a region, right? That's my goal. But they can't be the suburban communities of nowhere. So we've got to really focus on the core of downtown and revitalize and see what that next iteration of our future looks like. I think between some of those government buildings that we own as a state might need to be repurposed and put in the hands of the private sector and come up with creative solutions for us to drive new economy. The rail yards, which we know there's a little bit of stalled, there was momentum and then another little hurdle. But again, those are the type of things that are going to be the economic drivers that drive us out. And jobs create the tax basis, which gives us the money to invest into things like public safety, mental health, and substance abuse.
Which I do want to ask you a question on that, but I just want to note, you mentioned politics. I just want to name the counties that
All right.
that are part of the metro chain: El Dorado, Placer County, Sacramento County, Sutter, Yolo, and Yuba counties. And in case people don't know, there are some different politics, there's quite different sides of the spectrum of politics between some of these counties. Yeah. And you are in charge of keeping all that kind of together in regards to the chamber. So that's a pretty amazing feat. But if you would, for just a second, it kind of popped in my head when you were talking about jobs and things. But why should people that aren't in business feel or realize the importance of thriving businesses in their community? Like why should I care if I'm a school teacher and I'm taking my kids to practice? My job has nothing to do with a business downtown or anywhere else. Why should I go, yeah, it's important for my city to have a thriving business community?
I think that's a great question. And also one you sort of have to, chambers, let me say this, chambers used to shove one message down, kind of one subset of messages in terms of why support the chamber, why belong to the chamber, or, my father or my grandfather or my grandfather's father joined the chamber. That doesn't exist anymore. So I think that we have to be a lot more nimble in telling our story. And sometimes we're not the best at telling our story because we're in the trenches doing the work. But I think why the average person should care is, listen, business is going to drive vitality. Without having thriving jobs and thriving economies, where is the hope for someone to build their future, to build their life, to build their family, to have a place to call home? We're pretty lucky here in this region. We don't have a lot of corporate headquarters, and I think that could possibly change over the next subset of years, because there's some emerging technologies that are happening. So that said, we're lucky. You have partners like Sutter Health and Kaiser and Dignity and some of our medical system, and they invest. And they're investing in this community, whether it's in nonprofits and in initiatives that are transformational. Whether it's our educational partners. If you want to have a thriving economy, you've got to have good jobs for people. You've got to have jobs that people can raise a family, do the things they need to do. If you're retired, I think, it's a different spectrum. If someone's retired, they probably understand that a little bit more than maybe someone who, like you said, is a teacher. But what I'd say is it's a domino effect. So when we're driving jobs and driving the economy and new companies come to town or people are expanded, we're growing the employment base. We are encouraging work skills because they're going to advance in their industry. So the skill level is going to go up, which means salaries are going to go up. Ultimately, payroll taxes are coming into the market, which again gives that money to invest into the things that we need. We want good roads, we want good schools, we want safe communities, we want great, what I would say is whether it's parks and trails and all those civic amenities. Well, where does that come from? And so business is going to drive a lot of that. And so sometimes people think that business gets in the way. It's not. I think it's about having that conversation. And you mentioned a moment ago, that's a huge territory to cover from a political standpoint. And this is the way I look at it: is we're not red or blue. We're not one or the other. We are Sacramento and the region of Sacramento. And so at the end of the day, if we can meet people where they are and listen, if we can truly listen, because most people are listening, but they're formulating their response. They're really not listening to what they're talking about. And so whether it is Democrat or Republican, I can agree or disagree. That's probably one of the hardest things I had to learn in this industry. Well, second hardest. First was how to say no and not feel guilty. But the second hardest is if someone doesn't align with my belief on a particular topic or issue, is that a deal breaker for me as an individual or an industry? And I don't think it is, because we can philosophically have differences of opinions and approaches in how we do things. But if we have a core level of respect for people as individuals, we can achieve a lot together.
And I think that's really amazing, the work you and the chamber does, because in these times, I haven't been around forever, but I'm in my late 50s. It seems like we're more divided now than ever. And so somebody that can bring people that are oftentimes divided together, that's a skill. And that
chambers have done that since the beginning of time. I think they are the nucleus. They're the center. They're, what I call it is we're at the intersection of opportunity. Yeah. Like I mentioned, we don't have all the answers, but we know who does. And so generally speaking, when we bring people together, it's for good. And so I applaud every chamber across the nation that's out there championing their community every single day because we need them.
Yeah. So I'm going to just take a wild guess here.
All right.
That you, in the process of becoming the CEO of the Metro Chamber, in the interview process or whatever that process was, I'm going to guess that somebody asked you about your experience, opinions, whatever, in regards to homelessness. That's just a wild guess on my behalf.
Maybe.
So, and as somebody that has been here my entire life and has been in law enforcement, homelessness is an issue, regardless of where you stand on what you think needs to be done or what is currently going on or whatever. It is a challenge. It is an issue. It's not an easy thing to deal with and decide how we move forward. So what are your thoughts on, especially in regards to business, like some of the things that we should be thinking about? Maybe not necessarily the solution, because I don't know that there is any easy solution, but what are the things that you would hope that we are thinking about in regards to homelessness in this region?
It's a tough topic for a lot of people because people will fall on different ends of the spectrum. I think first and foremost, probably many people, we all are at different kind of points of our life in terms of where we fare financially and where we may be. But I think first and foremost, empathy. We have to understand that is a human being, that is someone's son, daughter, aunt, uncle, brother, sister, whatever that may be, is that first and foremost, it's a human. Now, where their life went wrong, that's a whole other conversation. Where they veered off course, that's somewhere else. But I think we have to ask ourselves this, and this is what I say as an individual: is this what we want for the fourth largest economy in the world, of our region of Sacramento? Is this what we want for our nation? Is this what we want? And I would think most people would say no, right? I can't imagine a person saying, "Oh yeah, this is great," right? Like nobody wants to see that for humankind. The solutions are going to be varied and comprehensive, because much like the homelessness here when I was in my previous community, I think it was, for me, really understanding the differences in homelessness and the unhoused, because, listen, if you're talking to a certain business owner where someone's just defecated in front of their store or thrown something through their window, they're mad. They don't care. They have no empathy at that moment because their livelihood is in that business. Yeah,
why would I want to go to that business if this is going on in front of your business?
And we have to allow them to have their moment. Look, we all have bad days, right? We all have our moment where we're not at our best. It's okay, right? Like, we got to respect that too. But I think that we have to figure this out. There's going to be a number of solutions, because, it used to be like when I grew up, they would say, "Oh, there's the bag lady," or "There's the hobo," right? Like there was a few people that that chose to be homeless, but they were pretty harmless by nature. Today's homelessness is much more severe and catastrophic for us. It scares people away. Yes. They become cold and less sensitive to it. But I think there's a huge portion where you could have someone who's chosen to be homeless, right? And so that's a different mindset. Then you could have someone who they've made some poor decisions somewhere along the line, and it was a domino effect of, they couldn't make the utility bill, then they couldn't make the rent bill, and so maybe they're living in their car or their vehicle, or maybe they can't make that and they're now living on the street. So, working with those organizations that are kind of those bridge builders and step builders to get them back on their feet. The more challenging is going to be with our folks who have substance abuse and the mental health. That, I think, is the predominant, as I talk to other chamber leaders that I'm friends with around the nation in their communities, that's the same thing. You have the choice. You have some people who have fallen on hard times, and that's where we really need to lean into our nonprofit communities that are providing solutions and the bridge building steps. But it's the mental health and the substance abuse where we really have the biggest issue as a nation. And I don't think this can happen in a vacuum. I think we can certainly make steps, but I think it's also a national conversation from the federal government because this isn't just happening in the streets of Sacramento.
No.
It's happening in every downtown and every corridor, even places that say they never experienced homelessness. Well, now they're seeing a dozen or 2 dozen. So it's happening on a large scale. So I really think that we have to peel back and come 30,000 foot above. And what I think what also happens is, and I see this in the chamber industry, is the infighting because this person thinks they're doing their best and this one doesn't think they're doing the best, and then sort of we get caught up in our own minutia of debating what we need to do. I think we need to pull out from there, come up 30,000 feet, get a few right people together and talk about where the money is going, how we're allocating those dollars, and really make some tough decisions. Are we putting it in the right place? But in the end, we've got to do something because it pains my heart every single day when I'm driving in and through downtown and I see people. And yeah, sometimes you're human. You want to turn your head the other way and you don't want to see it. But the reality is it's an issue we have to deal with.
Right. And to bring this to a specific topic that is back again in the kind of public eye right now, when I was chief, there was the whole discussion in the midst of COVID and all the social justice protests and things, and homelessness was on the forefront also, is when City Hall was, the ordinances were created for City Hall that people could spend the night typically under the overhang around City Hall, if anybody's been to City Hall in Sacramento, but then would have to leave early in the morning. And our officers would go make sure people left. And in the rare occasions they couldn't convince, because they got to know everybody too, that they could be cited. And I remember not only businesses, but residents in front of their homes and stuff said, well, okay, so, and just to go back a little bit, the purpose, one of the main purposes was safety. The safety of the employees that worked at City Hall, the hundreds and hundreds of people that worked at City Hall, but also people going to City Hall for business or whatever they were going there to conduct business there. There was a few incidents also that showed that, hey, there's times where this might not be safe. So the council created that ordinance. And now there's a discussion to do away with that no, now you can't camp around. So I imagine you've gotten some phone calls from some businesses, because I know as chief, I got phone calls from business leaders, from business owners, from residents that said, hold on a second. So the safety of people at City Hall is more important than the safety at my business? Like that, those same things are happening in front of my business, yet you're protecting that location, but you're not doing anything to my location. Yeah. So what do you think really the conversation needs to be around those topics? Because when you do that, I'm sure that conversation is coming up again. Well, wait a minute. If you're not allowing it there, why do you allow it in front of mine?
You're right. The conversation needs to come to a more long-term permanent solution, right? Maybe that was the best decision at that moment in time. I wasn't here and part of those conversations. Right. So how do I know what the mindset was there at the time? Because I think that's also what we do as a society. Sometimes we're picking apart things that we weren't at the table having those conversations on. So we sort of have to just accept them for what they are and then talk about where we are today. At the end of the day, listen, I don't think there's a person or a business owner or entrepreneur who doesn't recognize that we need to change the trajectory of downtown. We need a vibrant core for this region. There are some investments that are being made into the region that we need to strengthen this core. So with that said, while that may have worked at that time for whatever those reasons were, I don't think that's where we need to be in the future. I think we need to be looking at better long-term solutions. It's got to be, I put myself in the place of someone who's there. So they get a safe place for the night and then they run off in the morning. That's got to be mentally exhausting for those folks because they're out every single day trying to find. But, for the residents and the people trying to conduct business and go about they're impacted by this. I don't think that that's the best place to have people housed and sleeping is outside of City Hall. I think it's a deterrent. When I go into other communities and other cities and I see things like that, it's sort of like a turnoff. Right. You sort of like, ooh, that's like their crown jewel, right? Like that's their premium place, right? City halls, and they're revered. Capitals. They're sleeping on the Capitol grounds.
Right.
So we don't find them sleeping all over the Capitol grounds. I can remember coming here during COVID where that little sliver of sidewalk outside the Capitol, I remember there was being some tents along there, but they weren't on this side of it, right?
Right.
So I can remember and walking down, and even though I didn't live here, I felt comfortable, but there was still a level of uneasiness. I'm not saying they're bad people and horrible people in there, but we've got to do better. I think that our elected officials need to look for some better, more long-term solutions, and there's got to be an answer there.
Well, and I was just recently at San Francisco City Hall.
Okay.
And San Francisco definitely has its challenges with homelessness, no different than Sacramento, but I didn't see any of those issues around their City Hall. And so I want to end with this because I don't, we've talked a lot about challenges to the Sacramento region, to the business community, those sort of things. But I don't want to leave people with the impression that this isn't a great region. This
agree
is
with
a
you.
place I've called home
wholeheartedly
my
agree
whole
with
life,
you.
and I think it's amazing here. And we're not unlike other communities. We have our challenges, but it's an amazing place. So I want to end on this. The chamber and I don't know how many years, as long as I can remember, has been coordinating a huge part of Cap to Cap. I'd love for you to talk a little bit about what's the significance of Cap to Cap, and then I have a follow-up question about future for Sacramento. So Cap to Cap, and I think coming up, you're doing another trip to Boston.
Correct.
Kind of a field trip, if you will, to kind of get ideas and things to bring back to Sacramento.
Absolutely. Well, first, I agree with you on the positive and optimism. So those things that we talked about, every community, every region is challenging themselves with solutions for those things. So we're not alone. It's not just a Sacramento problem. Right. I hope no one feels burdened or heavy because of that first part of our conversation. Because look, at least we're willing to have those conversations and we're willing to look for solutions and better pathways forward. Right? We could just be complacent and go about our day-to-day lives and act as nothing exists. So the good news is there's a lot of people working on these things. What makes us great is the people here. I've served a number of communities, like I mentioned earlier, and the collaboration here amongst people in industry, I have never seen in one of the other markets I've been in. And I think that's what makes us so great. So going to Cap, we just celebrated our 53rd journey back there.
It has been a while.
What's pretty remarkable about this, we were the first to embark on kind of a delegation traveling back to D.C.
Which is a large delegation, right? Like how many people go?
We had 450 this year.
Wow.
So it started in 1970, and it was around BRAC, base realignment committees and things like that to fight for our bases. And obviously,
Which
things
is
have
a big
happened.
part of Sacramento.
Big part of Sacramento at the time. And so we've lived on all this time. We are the largest delegation of any chamber of commerce in the nation to embark on DC. A lot of chambers go back.
Say that again for the people in the back.
So we are the largest delegation
From Sacramento region
of any chamber of commerce in the nation. Some will have 150, 200 people, but we travel back with 450 partners. With that shows from a regional perspective that we can rise above and focus on issues. Because look, we divide up into 13 different policy teams on our Cap to Cap program, and these are the experts. I'm not going to be the wildfire expert, right? I'm not going to be the person that knows, some of the nuancing within each of these industry segments that we're championing, but we're bringing our partners together. They're collaborating position papers for us as a region, and we're looking at it from what is going to move us forward as a region. And when we went back to DC just this past April, we go back for some advanced trips, but we went back and several of the offices said, listen, we've kicked a few chambers out already because they came in with where we're wrong or where they're right, and it was very partisan, blue and red. And Sacramento got noted for basically setting the table for how it should be done, because we certainly have people on both sides of the aisle and everything in the middle. And we went back, when you have partners, it doesn't matter what industry segment, whether it's law enforcement, healthcare,
which are all represented
tech,
in that group.
They're all there with one voice around the region, because the issues of wildfire and flooding and those are not partisan issues. Those are issues that are going to protect this region and drive commerce. So for us, we're just, what I'm excited about is we're just beginning, right? We've got a great opportunity ahead of us. We'll have our next delegation going back again next year. And, we're going to continue to fight for our fair share of those federal dollars. We partner with our congressional representatives. We got 6 and it's a divided House. And so that forces us to find what I said earlier, the sane center. And we're very fortunate that we have our congressional representatives who are there and embracing us and trying to look for those solutions and bring in real dollars and solutions back to Sacramento.
Good. So earlier, when I asked you about, why should people care about the chamber if they're not directly involved with the chamber, and as somebody that kind of considers myself a history nerd, if you will. I grew up in a neighborhood called Oak Park here in Sacramento that it was challenged with poverty, challenged with crime, challenged with gangs, challenged with sex trafficking. And I didn't know growing up there the history of my neighborhood. And as I researched history, business was a big part of that change and the removal of business and the businesses leaving that community, which was really truly the start of that community changing to a high poverty community from a thriving community. Same thing with El Paso Heights, and you mentioned bases. All that kind of economic vitality was a huge part of communities falling into poverty and the challenges that come with that. Just to reinforce the importance of business to not just business, but all things your city. So with that in mind, you mentioned AI earlier, but what do you see, what is your vision moving forward, especially within the business community? What do you think we should be looking at to, because I was part of a leadership cohort at Stanford years ago, and there was one of the speakers that came in as this well-renowned professor in regards to energy and things like that. And he talked about the autonomous electric cars and what the future holds in that, and how in the past we went from a horse-driven economy to a car-driven economy and all this. And it struck me that he was talking about, like, at one point he said 10% of San Francisco is parking, and at some point you won't need any of that. And so San Francisco can re-envision what they do with 10% of their land, and how they do that is going to tell how their city goes in the future. And so this real visioning process of the future is really an indicator of how your city's going to thrive. Detroit comes to mind to that, right? Like at one point Detroit, and now they're kind of coming back. But at one point Detroit was 1 million people, thriving city, and they didn't do good on the envisioning part, and they fell to 600,000 or whatever, and house prices and the economy in a shambles. So for this region, for the Sacramento region, what do you think we should be thinking about as future in that regard?
So, I think what's dangerous if we find ourselves in the place we've always done it that way, right? We can't do that.
Politics comes to mind in this town.
It does, absolutely. We can't do it. We can't do what we've always done. Also, we're in a global economy that's far more competitive today than it ever was before, and it's only going to get more competitive for us. So I think we have to really recognize that. The other thing is innovation. And what does innovation really mean to people? And really, it's change. And what I find sometimes is people are reluctant to change and growth because what does that mean to them? Or are they ready for change? Like sometimes change happens whether we like it or not, right? We're not prepared for it, and other times we're preparing for it. But really, we have to look at how to drive our region as innovative. We have got some really, really remarkable assets. There are some unique histories within pockets of our region and communities that we need to tap into and embrace. The fact that this region has the diversity that it does is a strength of ours. I know there are folks out there and across the nation, sometimes they're fearful of that, but I think that's an absolute strength for us when we have other minds and other belief systems and other kind of cultures blending together. That's only going to make Sacramento and our region stronger. And I don't think we've really tapped into what that means for us. from the entrepreneur spirit. Listen, it used to be where people felt like they went and got a job and they were there 20, 30, 40 years.
Yeah.
Right. That's changed today.
Oh, for sure.
It's like it used to be years ago when I look at resumes, if someone was to place 1, 2, or 3 years, I'm like, oh, they're a hopper. Today, I mean, it's
That's
much
normal.
more common, right? It's not a negative.
In everything, including law enforcement.
It is, right? And so, we have to really look at what we want for the region. There's a number of organizations that we work with that I think are trying to look and focus on the future. We partner with an organization called GSEC, and they're focusing on marketing the region and working to bring them in the different emerging technologies. We have to recognize that we're farm to fork capital, and there's a new initiative. You talked about our study mission, and so when we go to these things, we are learning from other regions where they have failed, where they tripped up, and we're trying to bring the best of the best back here to
So
Sacramento.
it's where plagiarism is legal.
That's right. It's called rip off and duplicate. But what's interesting is, we want to go learn from them. I mentioned the Food Frontier, and that launched as a new initiative through a couple partners, Megan and Brad, who really are looking at the future of innovation around food because, when you think about this, we're going to have to feed over 10 billion people by the year 2050. And if we stay in traditional models of agriculture and farming today, which are phenomenal, how are we going to feed this? And so we have to look at different solutions. And I think the Sacramento region is poised for that. You talked about the electrification, things like that. I know our partner, Orville, he's working on some things around kind of the electrification and things like that. So we have to constantly be looking at what industry is going to drive us to the future and how are we poised to set up to embrace that and not sort of get it caught up in the minutia. Because I think sometimes when these industries or companies come into town, we're focusing on the wrong thing. What we need to do, and this is what I would say and some are better than others, and not just in our region, but across the nation, when new business is coming our way, whether it's through city council or county governments, we need to be open for business, and we need to work with those businesses to make that road as easy as possible for them to get those doors open and create the jobs. It doesn't mean that our businesses and owners are going to be rule breakers and not do things right, but sometimes the minutia of that journey for someone is a deal breaker, and then we lose things along the way. So what we need to do is embrace business, see that as a welcomed, economic development is a good thing. Responsible, economic development, infill projects, we need to look at those. And sometimes we have folks who will say, oh, one size fits all. No two economic development deals are the same. So you really have to look at each one uniquely and figure out how are we, and that's the question I would say to anyone that's working, how are we working to support them to bring this reality to life? Because if we bring a new industry, we bring a new technology, a new concept to market here, we have jobs, we have vitality.
And diversify your economy,
And
right?
we keep diversifying the economy, and I think we have all the assets. That's why I said Sacramento, the region is simmering. We're there, and now this is our moment. We can. There is nothing that is going to stop us but ourselves. So we have to be willing to set ego aside, set all that sort of stuff to the roadside, and focus on the goal and the solution to make Sacramento and this region the best place to live, work, and play.
Well, that's great to hear. Recently I was out of town, maybe a few weeks ago, and I heard something that I've never heard before. You mentioned the food scene and food, farm to fork and all that. Somebody says to me from out of town, man, the food scene in Sacramento is awesome. And I'm thinking, I grew up here. I've never heard somebody out of town. When I was growing up, Sacramento was much different, but people used to always, this town is boring, this town. And to hear somebody go, the food scene in Sacramento is, so I was like, man, not only marketing, but the actual food scene itself is being successful. If somebody out of town from a city that you would have thought, oh, I would think people would think your city is more food than Sacramento, but this person is saying that. So in closing, what if I was a new business coming to town, or maybe somebody not involved in business, but I wanted to get either involved with the chamber or learn more about the chamber, how would I go about getting involved with what the chamber does?
So I think it's easy. Pick up the phone, give us a call. We've got an amazing team, that is happy to be of assistance every single day. Our website at metrochamber.org, it's got a wealth of knowledge. We hold a number of events and programs designed to bring people together. So those are certainly opportunities. call us, reach out. If someone's coming and excited, I guarantee you we can help them, maybe save a few steps or accelerate the process, because
navigate.
We know the road, right? And so, what's crazy is sometimes people forget about the chamber. And I say this as, again, 25 years from me next year in this world. Go to any town USA, and there's going to be a chamber of commerce. Mm-hmm. There is not one organization like ours out there. There's doing all the things that we do, from business connectivity to advocacy to, mentorship and helping businesses with skills and techniques to grow their business. Right. The Chamber is one of those organizations that will stand the test of time. We will keep evolving. We will trip up. We will, continue to challenge ourselves to do better, to serve the community, because at the end of the day, that's what it's about. Right. Every single day for me, when I get up, I say to myself when I look in the mirror, can I make a difference today? And that comes in many different shapes and forms, because we touch the lives of people that we don't even know. Because of the work that we do, there are people who may be in business, may not be in business, that are benefiting from the goodwill and work that we provide as a chamber. We're here. We're open for business. We're just a phone call away.
Well, I have to tell you, I am thrilled to hear the leader of our chamber saying they wake up every day hoping and planning to make a positive difference in the lives. You didn't say in business owners. You didn't say in a particular business. You said in the lives of the people that are here. So I'm definitely appreciative of a person in your position having that kind of mindset, because I think that's what we need, regardless of what line of business we're in or profession we're in. If that is our goal, then we will come up with the solutions that we need.
I agree wholeheartedly.
And I'd just like to thank you for your time here today, but even more importantly, for your time and your clear energy towards especially business that is so critical, whether we're in business or not. The economy, the economic vitality of our region is critically important to all of us, no matter what we are doing, what our families are doing. So thank you for accidentally kind of getting into this profession and continuing on and coming to this region and leading the Metro Chamber. Thank you very much.
I love it. Thank you.